Hi everyone, I'm Miss Martine. As some of you young chefs already know, we have a bunch of videos on our FoodPrints website that show you how to do specific things in the kitchen, like how to cut an onion or how to use a can opener. We call these our kitchen skills videos, and you should definitely watch them before starting any recipe. Also, during our recipe videos, you might see this pop up. This symbol is a reminder to watch the skills videos first so that you know how to safely do whatever the teacher is doing on the screen. And one last important thing to remember, you should only do these recipes if you have a grown-up around who's ready to help you and keep you safe. And that's it. Now, have fun cooking.
Hi friends, I'm your FoodPrints teacher, Miss Taylor, and today we will be making a yummy dish called Stoplight Quinoa Salad. I bet you're wondering where that name comes from. Well, think about the colors of a stoplight. They're red, yellow, and green, right? Well, today we're going to be working with red, yellow, and green peppers, so that's why we call it Stoplight Quinoa Salad. Before we get started, I want to talk to you about quinoa, our main ingredient. Quinoa is a grain that comes from the Andes Mountains in South America. I like to use it because it cooks quickly, it's a good source of protein, and it mixes well with other flavors. Of course, if you don't have quinoa at home, that's okay. You can use whatever grains you have, such as rice or barley. So the first thing we always do before cooking or baking is read the recipe all the way through. That way, we can figure out our mise en place. If you've watched our other recipe videos, you know that mise en place is a French term that means getting everything organized. So let's take a look at our mise en place for Stoplight Quinoa Salad. And as you can notice, here we have our nice, clean workspace. All right, so for our mise en place, we have a big bowl for mixing, 2 smaller bowls, a fork, a big spoon to mix with, a knife, and this is our cutting board. We also have a water pitcher, measuring cups and measuring spoons, a juicer and a zester, a pot with a tight-fitting lid, a can opener, a colander and a strainer, 1 can of black beans, a red onion, our red, yellow, and green bell peppers, just like our stoplight. We also have some cilantro. This is our red wine vinegar. We have 2 limes, some olive oil, some cumin, some coriander, which is a spice that comes from a seed, some salt, and finally, we have a spicy pepper, just in case you like spicy foods. So that's our mise en place for our Stoplight Quinoa Salad. And as you can see, we have everything out and organized and ready to go. So now it's on to our recipe. The first thing we need to do is measure out our quinoa. For this recipe, we'll be using 1½ cups. So let's check in with some friends and see how they measure their quinoa.
So wait, we're gonna measure out 1½ cups. This is a 1 cup measure, right? Mm-hmm. Lily, can you kneel so you're a little taller? This is gonna out some quinoa. Go ahead and gentle, careful pour. Yeah, there you go. Good girl. Nice. Keep going, gotta go all the way to the top. Perfect. Okay, good.
Nice job, guys. And as you can see, I moved some things around to give myself a little more space. I also have some water to clean my quinoa. And just like you saw my friends do, I've measured out my 1½ cups of quinoa and placed it in this bowl. Now, whenever you're using grains, it's always a good idea to wash and strain them before cooking. especially quinoa, because quinoa can sometimes have a bitter taste if you don't rinse it. I also just like to wash it just to make sure there are no sticks or little stones floating around. I know you may be thinking, what? Sticks and stones? Yep, these grains were grown and harvested in nature, so it's a good idea to just sift through everything. So to wash our quinoa, we're going to first cover them with water. Then we can use something like a spatula or a spoon to give it a good stir. To wash our quinoa, first we cover them with water. Then we're going to use something like a spatula or a spoon and give it a good stir. The movement of the water is what's helping clean the quinoa. Once we're done stirring, about a minute or so, we can use our strainer to drain off the water. If you don't have a strainer, that's okay. You can just slowly pour the water out and use your hand as a buffer so the quinoa doesn't fall out. So I've stirred it a little bit and now I'm going to strain it. Just so that I can stay where I am, I'm just going to strain it over this big bowl. And you can see the liquid that came off is really cloudy, and this is exactly the reason why we wanted to wash and rinse our quinoa in the first place. So now that our quinoa is washed and rinsed, we're going to put it into our pot, which I have right here. So this is the pot that we're going to cook the quinoa in just a minute. So I'm just using my spoon to scrape my quinoa in, and it's okay if you can't get all of it, we just want to get most of it. The next thing we need to do is add some water, and this involves something called a ratio. A ratio is a math term, and it simply means the relationship between different amounts. Today, our ratio of water to quinoa is 2 to 1. That means we use 2 cups of water for every 1 cup of quinoa. In other words, twice as much. But this gets a little tricky because if you remember, we used 1.5 cups of quinoa. So since our ratio is 2 to 1, we need to figure out what amount is 2 times 1.5 cups? Any ideas? Well, if you said 3 cups of water, you're correct, which means now you're a chef and a math wizard. So I've got my 3 cups of water here, and I'm just going to add it into my pot. Once the quinoa is covered with water, we're going to move the pot to the stove. Once your quinoa is on the stove, you would have a grown-up turn the burner on to medium. After a few minutes, the water in the pot will come to a boil, and you'll know the water is boiling when you see steam rising from the pot and bubbles inside. Once the water is boiling, you would turn off the heat, put the lid on, and set a timer for 15 minutes. What you'll be looking to see when the timer goes off is how much water is left in the pot. If the water is just about all absorbed and the quinoa has expanded a little, it's most likely done. And at that point, you can have your grown-up fluff it up a little bit with a fork. Then pour it into a big bowl and let it cool down. That whole process, from when you first put it on the stove to when it cools down, normally takes about 20 minutes. But today, it only took 5 seconds. This is just because I didn't want us to have to sit here and wait for the quinoa to cook, so I cooked some earlier. Check it out. It looks different when it's all cooked, right? So we're going to use this cooked quinoa for the rest of our recipe. And now it's time to move on to our black beans. If you have the time and energy, you can make black beans at home, which will save you some money. But it takes a little bit of work and a lot of time. So today we're going to be using black beans from a can. And that means we need to get these cans opened. So let's see how some of our friends take care of that job.
See that little thing over there?
Yeah.
We gotta kind of make it go on that side in between, and then I'm gonna close it a little, and then you're gonna grab it and grab it tight till you hear it. Oh gosh, it's a little hard. Let's do it together. 1, 2, 3. Oh, did you hear that? Nice. Okay. So now you're gonna hold, okay, wait. You're gonna hold this with your left hand, this side with your left hand, and this side go like this. Okay? Hold it together. Can you grab the can? Okay, and then pour it in here. Go ahead, pour all the way in. Good girl.
Well done, friends. Okay, I'm going to add my beans in with our cooked quinoa, and I'll put that bowl aside for a moment. And now it's time to start cutting our vegetables. And since it doesn't really matter which ones we cut first, I think I'll start with my peppers. To do this, you can either use a sharp knife or a butter knife. But if you use a sharp knife, make sure you ask a grown-up for help. So to start, we want to begin by putting our hand in the tunnel position, and then use your knife to cut the pepper in half. Some people like to leave the seeds in the pepper, but I like to cut those out too. It's really up to you what you decide to do, but this is how I like to do it. And you can just pop them right out and put them to the side. So remember, our recipe is called Stoplight Quinoa Salad because we have 3 different peppers and they're the same colors as a stoplight: red, yellow, and green. And they're going to make our salad look really beautiful when we're all done. So usually when we cut something that is an odd shape like a pepper, we want it to be on the flat side, but we're going to flip it over so that our knife doesn't slip while we're cutting. So I've got my hand in the claw and I'm just going to start going for it. As you can see, I have a lot more peppers to chop, so let's check in with our friends at home and see how they're handling all of these.
Help if I tried to use the, okay, gentle, slow. Let's keep your fingers away from the knife. Go ahead. Aiden, you don't have to go back and forth, just once, okay? There you go.
That's too big.
That's okay, these are fine, these are good bite-sized pieces.
Awesome job cutting those peppers, guys. As you can see, I've got mine cut as well, and the mix of colors just looks awesome. So now it's time to get into the onions. Cutting onions usually requires a sharp knife to start, and it can also sometimes make your eyes water. So it's best to have a grown-up around to help you when you're cutting onions. For this recipe, we're going to use 1/2 of a small red onion. Now there are a couple different ways to cut an onion. Today I'm going to start by cutting off the top and then the bottom. So I'm cutting off the top, and I'm just going to put that to the side. Going to flip it over, got my claw, and I'm going to cut the bottom off and also put that aside. Then it's nice because we have a flat base to work with. So I put the cut side down on the cutting board, and next, with my hand in the tunnel position, I'm going to cut the onion in half. Now if you remember, this recipe only calls for 1/2 of an onion. So I'm going to take this and just put it to the side for right now. I'm also going to start pulling back some of this onion skin, and I'll put that to the side as well. We want these pieces to be kind of small. Whenever I cut an onion with my students, I like to give them little rainbow pieces, kind of like this. It's awesome because it really does look like a rainbow, so everybody gets so excited. I like to do this because it makes it a lot easier and faster to cut the onion into smaller pieces. And for this recipe, we want to have small dices. Some people really don't like red onion, so if you want to leave it out, that's okay. But one of the tricks to making it work is to cut the pieces really small so you can't even really tell they're there. And I'm going to do this for my entire onion. And when they're just the right size, I'll add them to my bowl of beautiful peppers. Look at all these beautiful little rainbows. Every time I cut, I just move a little bit to the side and I keep going. And we're almost there. And then once we're done, we're going to add all of these delicious onions, kind of an addition to our stoplight, some purple. And then we'll add it to our bowl of our chopped peppers. Last piece. And all of these will go into our bowl. So at this point, I've got a lot of ingredients here and in my big bowl, so I think it's time to give everything a little stir. So while I mix these ingredients, you can visit with some FoodPrints friends at home to see how they're stirring their ingredients.
Gentle mixing. Nice.
How do you mix?
How do you mix? You know what you can do is you go from the outside in, outside in, outside in.
Oh, stop.
Okay,
You
try
are
it.
doing it.
Okay, you do it now. Yes.
When it's done, can we taste it?
Yes, when it's done, we can absolutely taste it. Do you see how pretty it is with the red, yellow, and green, and the black beans and the quinoa?
Yeah.
Yummy.
It's kind of fun watching our onions and peppers and quinoa mix all together. Really starting to look like a salad now. The last thing we need to do for our Stoplight Quinoa Salad is to chop our cilantro. Our recipe calls for a half cup of chopped cilantro, so I'm going to use about half of this bunch. Just going to give this a few more stirs and we'll start working on our cilantro. Yeah, I'm going to put this to the side and let's keep going. So for our cilantro, we only want to use the leaves. So we're going to separate the leaves from the stem. And as I mentioned, I'm just going to use about half of this bunch, so I'm going to take half and put the other half away for right now. And what we need to do is take the leaves off the stem. And this takes a little bit of time, but it's really worth it. And I'm just going to make a pile of leaves and a pile of stems, just so that I can keep my workspace a little bit more organized. I find that chopping herbs is easiest when you have a big sharp chef knife. So I think that we've almost got enough cilantro for our recipe. I'm just going to give this a nice good chop. Now remember, if you are using a big sharp knife like this, you need the help of an adult. If you don't have a grown-up around right now, you can just use some scissors. But just make sure your scissors are clean before you start chopping your herbs. I think this is about half a cup. Let's see. Oh man, that is looking awesome. So now this cilantro is the last thing that's being added to our salad before we make our dressing. So I'm just going to finish stirring this up a little bit. And then I'm going to clean up my workspace so we can start making our salad dressing. I'm just moving these things to the side. I find it's really hard to keep organized when you have so much stuff in your workspace. So for the dressing, one option for making the salad dressing is to put everything in a jar with a lid and then shake it all up at the end. But you can also make it in a small bowl and mix it together with a whisk or a spoon, which is what we're going to do today. To make our salad dressing, we're going to need to do some measuring. So I've got my measuring spoons right here. Now, if you have a friend helping you with this recipe, this is a great time to work as a team. One person can hold the spoon steady over the bowl, while the other person slowly pours. But if you don't have a partner, no problem. I'm sure you can handle this part all by yourself. The first ingredient we need for the salad is 3 tablespoons of red wine vinegar. So I've got my red wine vinegar and I've got my tablespoon. To do this, I hold my measuring spoon over my bowl and slowly pour into my measuring spoon. I'm holding it over the bowl just in case if anything spills, it spills into the spot we want it to be in. So we need 3 tablespoons. That was 1, 2, and 3. And you'll notice as I add the ingredients, I just close them back up and move them out of the way. The next thing we want to do is we want to add our olive oil. And we're going to do the same thing as with the vinegar. We're going to hold the spoon over the bowl and go ahead and pour. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. As you're pouring these things, you may notice that the oil and the vinegar aren't together. In my bowl, I see little dots of my vinegar not mixing with my oil. Don't worry about this, they will mix when it's time to. Once all of our oil and vinegar are in the bowl, we can move on to our limes. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to need the zest from our limes, and we're also going to need the juice from our limes. The zest comes from the outside, and the juice comes from the inside. Now, if you need a refresher on how to zest, check out our zesting video in the FoodPrints toolkit. But basically, what we're going to do is take our grater in one hand and hold it nice and tight, and we'll push and roll our lime on the grater, like this. And you know that it's working because the color of the lime will turn white instead of green. And I'm just going to do this until all of the lime is zested for this one and the other one. I like to do the zesting part before the juicing part because to juice you have to cut the lime or whatever you're juicing open, and it's really, really difficult to zest something that's already cut in half. So this lime is looking pretty well zested, so now I'm going to move on to my other one. You know that your zesting is working when you can smell lime. Just a nice lime smell in the air. And I think that my second lime is almost all the way zested, and we can move into the juicing. Ooh, yum, that looks awesome. Nice and green. Even though this is a stoplight salad, it's going to have a lot of other colors too. So now that we've got our zest, we're going to add this to our dressing bowl, and then we'll move on to juicing the limes. Sometimes if you're using a microplane to zest, you'll see that the zest gets stuck inside. I'm just going to do a little tap tap, let it come out, and then I'm going to get started on the juicing. So when you're juicing any citrus fruits like a lemon or an orange or even limes like we have here, there's a little trick to do before we get started. We roll the fruit on a hard surface, which makes it a little easier for the juice to come out when we get to that part. So I'm going to do that for both my limes, and I'm just pushing and going back and forth. With the fruit down on the surface, we're just applying a little bit of pressure with our hands and going back and forth. And like I mentioned, this motion should help soften up the lime for juicing. Next, we're going to cut the lime in half by putting our hand in the tunnel position and slicing the lime down the middle. Now, if you have a juicer at home, like I have here, you can use it. And if you don't, you can just use a fork. I'm going to show you both ways. With my fork, I'm just holding it tightly and pressing in. And the juice slowly starts coming out. You can also just give it a nice little squeeze. And then I'm going to move on to my other half of my lime. This time I'm going to use my juicer. But it really doesn't matter what type of equipment you use. All that matters is that the juice comes out and goes into our delicious salad dressing. Just going to pour this in and finish up with my last lime. So again, going to use my tunnel position and cut my lime in half and keep on going. And that juice is just coming out really easily. I'd like to think it's because we rolled it out beforehand. And so our dressing is almost complete, but the last thing we'll have to do is to add our spices. For this part, we're going to be using teaspoons. Awesome. So we're going to be adding some coriander and also some cumin. First up, we need 1½ teaspoons of cumin. Since we're using a ½ teaspoon and we need 1½ teaspoons for our recipe, I'll have to do this 3 times. Our recipe also calls for 1 teaspoon of coriander, so I'll do the same thing. I'll put my ½ teaspoon in the coriander, level it out, and pour it in. Because this recipe calls for 1 teaspoon and we're using a ½ teaspoon, I'll do it 1 more time. Then I'm going to use my fork, and if you're using a whisk at home, that's fine. And we're gonna mix all of our dressing ingredients together. It's really starting to smell good. So I'm just gonna stir until the oil and the vinegar and all of the seasonings look like they're combined well. Now that our dressing is complete, the only thing left to do is to add it to our salad. So we will put our big bowl here, and then I'm just gonna pour the dressing over and we'll stir it up again. Yum. So when you're stirring, we just want to make sure that everything looks coated with oil and that everything smells really delicious like it already does. I'm going to stir a little bit more, and then I'm going to lightly season this with a little bit of salt. You can pour it right in, or you can put it into your hand and do some pinches. I find this gives me a little bit more control over just how much salt I'm putting in. And then you can just keep mixing and then add salt to a different place and just keep on mixing. You could also add some pepper if you'd like, but it's really up to you what seasonings you want to put in. So that's it. Now you know how to make Stoplight Quinoa Salad. Thanks so much for joining me today. Don't forget to check out our other recipe videos, and we'll see you next time.